There is perhaps no more challenging place in the world to establish peace than between Israel and Palestine. For decades, the nations have been embroiled in a bloody conflict that has claimed lives and taken a toll on the land, human safety, and human dignity. Forging peace across this seemingly insurmountable divide has eluded U.S. presidents and leaders of both nations. While debates remain on how to forge peace, what is clear is that people on both sides are suffering, and that a dialogue at the human level about peace, while not a solution, provides a start. Today on In Depth with Konyka Dunson, join me for a conversation on pathways to peace in the Middle East. Peace in the Middle East is not an impossible reality, but something that Mike Daly and Mark Braverman are deeply invested in and believe that while complicated and challenging, is possible. They join me for a conversation on peace at the Historical Society of Washington, D.C. Mike Daly, a delegation leader at Interfaith Peace Builders, leads delegations of U.S. citizens to Israel and Palestine to meet peacemakers on both sides to understand the conflict for themselves. Mark Braverman is a former delegation member and author. Up next, Mike Daly shares his insights. So talk about Interfaith Peace Builders. Why this place in the world? This seems like a very dangerous place in the world. Also, to people who've never been there, a place in the world where you would think this conflict just rages on and on. So why even start this organization or be a part of it and take people there? What is the intention behind it?
Well, we were invited to begin the program by an Israeli organization and a Palestinian organization. And they came to us in 2000, right after the start of the Second Intifada. And we'd led some sort of sporadic delegations before that, but said, with the outbreak of the Second Intifada, we really need Americans to get over here. That we need Americans to know more about what's happening on the ground. We need them to know about the violence that's happening, the start of the Second Intifada. But far more important, we need them to know about the nonviolent, the courageous Israeli and Palestinian activists who are working for nonviolence. We read to this day in our media a lot about the violence that happens over there, the suicide bombings, the attacks. Those things do happen. But we don't hear a lot about the courageous Israelis and Palestinians, and there are many of them who wake up every day, who don't use violence, who are working for their political goals in different nonviolent ways. And so really the delegation started because of that. And we see our work as very much not really happening on the delegation. We go for 2 weeks. We meet Israelis and Palestinians. We meet activists working there. We learn about the occupation. But our work really is in America, as Americans, to inform constituencies here. So we give people the tools and support to come back and write books, but also to do media work, to do presentations, to tell others in the community what's really happening on the ground. America is such a vital participant in this conflict. We often pose ourselves as an honest broker. The American administration is trying to broker peace, and there have been lots of peace efforts, and lots of them have failed. But we send Israel close to $15 million a day in support, our tax dollars, and I think that that's a salient point at this time of financial downturn especially. That's one current reason why this is so applicable. As people and families in America are suffering, we're still giving that aid relatively unconditionally to Israel. And I think that's really important to remember.
You said one of the main reasons to go is for the people who go on the delegations to get a sense of the suffering, to see firsthand the suffering of the people. Talk about, from a personal experience, what it's like for you to go and see the situation.
We travel throughout the West Bank, we travel through Israel, and we meet Israelis and Palestinians. And the Palestinians talk about their lives under occupation. The Israelis talk about their lives in Israel and some of their security concerns. The Palestinian citizens of Israel, 25% of the population of Israel are Palestinian citizens. They talk about sort of their place somewhat in the middle of the conflict. We go to a refugee camp and sort of spend the night there and see what it's like for Palestinian refugees who've been there since 1948. We hear from a former Palestinian who was in jail actually for violent activities during the first Intifada, and a former member of the IDF, the Israeli military, who have, I don't think they founded, but they're together work in an organization called Combatants for Peace. And they have both turned from violence and said, we need to solve this, we need to work together. And they do training, they go into schools, they do all types of work together as Israelis and Palestinians. So this is a picture that would be at a checkpoint, that would signal the fact that you're leaving or going into Area A, which Palestinians theoretically have some sovereignty in. But the interesting thing that this picture reminds me of is Rami El-Hanan, we took him, he's an Israeli, and it's illegal for him to go into Area A, into the Palestinian area. And he could be, I think he told us he could get like a $50,000 fine if he were caught in the Palestinian area. He went. He was willing to risk that. But think about what that does in terms of knowing people on the other side. It's illegal for Israelis to cross that way. It's illegal for Palestinians to go the other way. So it's a good picture illustrating how hard it is to build any trust. I think the vast majority of, almost everyone we meet in our delegations, and I think the vast majority of people who live there are ready for a solution. They wouldn't all agree on the scope of that solution or the exact details of that solution. But I think, we often think of these people as the other, as the conflict as being completely irreconcilable, not understandable. But they're people just like us. They'd much rather wake up with peace, just like all of us would. Everyone we met on this trip said we can't do this ourselves. This call for international civil society, all of us have a role to play in this. And the Israelis and Palestinians want us to play that role. They're inviting us to come into their villages, into their refugee camps, into their homes.
Why do they think their leaders can't help broker a solution? Why is it so important for the outside involvement?
My best guess from all of the people that I've met over there is leaders have tried. And the politicians haven't been able to figure it out. And a lot of people just feel like they don't have the will. There's a lot of corruption in both governments, and people are sort of fed up with corruption as well, both within the Palestinian Authority and within the Israeli government. But again, the activists that we're meeting with are members of that civil society and realize that they need the help of activists around the world.
Up next, author Mark Braverman talks about how he is responding to the call for peace. Stay tuned for more In Depth with Konyka Dunson.